Welcome. Glad some of you got the message that today is Rivalry Sunday. There happens to be a series going on the north side that calls us to echo rivalry stuff. Somebody told me, a couple of people told me as they came in this morning, we expected you to be decked out in red. I'm practicing the Christian virtue of grace. No need to rub it in. We're 6 games up. That's all that matters. Somebody else, as we're talking about promoting today, the Rivalry Sunday, said, "Who's gonna represent?" Most people that are here dressed up have our Bears jerseys on. They wanted to know who's going to represent the Packers since she's no longer here, and so we have a slice of cheese that we're going to place here on the front pew to represent Shannon this morning. Every time a team plays, they're taking a risk. Risking injury, risking loss. They're taking a risk. I tend to be risk averse. I don't really like stepping out there and really not knowing if it's going to work. I really like things sealed up, packaged nicely, neatly put together, guaranteed kind of thing. I don't generally embrace risk, except when my wife leaves town for about a week. When my wife leaves town for about a week, this is what happens. We had a leak in our living room ceiling, and Lara has always wanted to get rid of that popcorn ceiling that we've had for 21 years, and so she's gone, and now the ceiling is as well. Don't worry, she knows. Elizabeth took pictures and sent it to her as the project was being done. Luckily, she waited and sent the last picture, which was the one of the most massive destruction after everything was already cleaned up. That picture was, we didn't know that as we were pulling down the drywall for the ceiling that there was 4 inches of insulation above the ceiling. And so all of that insulation, we had a coat, nice winter coat of insulation on all of the living room. Don't worry, everything was covered up well, plastic and so forth, so I took the slightest risk that I could, but risk nonetheless. Do you take risks? Are you a risk taker? Do you see people who post pictures of themselves jumping out of a perfectly good airplane and wonder, why in the world are you doing something like that? Or do you say, I could do that? That's something I think I'd enjoy. Are you a risk taker? Do you step out and do the things that leave other people saying, what were you thinking? Or do you seem to hold back as others are doing those kind of things and you're saying, not me. Let them risk their lives. Let them show their insanity. I'm not going there. When it comes to faith, are you a risk taker? Oh, it's not something like jumping out of airplanes and things like that, but there is risk to living the Christian life. There is cost. There is that thing that we call faith. And faith is about risk. There's a story that Jesus tells in Matthew chapter 25. And in that story, we have come to look at it as more of a quaint story that teaches that we should use our skills for God. No matter what skills or how many skills God has given you, use those skills to serve Him. But this parable warns of something much more dynamic than that. For it warns us of the danger of an easy and comfortable faith which is not put at risk to grow God's kingdom. In Matthew chapter 25, Jesus tells this story, beginning at verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey. He calls his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also had he who had 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of this servant came and settled accounts with him. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 more talents. And his master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I know you are a hard man, in reaping where you do not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gathered where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested the money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So he took the talent from him and gave it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant in the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, what we've done with that, we've taken those talents and we've used that. We've defined those talents in terms that we use that term. Talents are skills, and so you have that 5-skill guy who obviously has, it's a 5-star athlete, the guy that can hit, throw, run, catch. I mean, he's got all the skills. He's got it all together. He's the 5 talent. And then you have the 2 talent guy. He's the guy that he can hit for power, but he strikes out a whole lot. He can't really play the outfield real well. He's got a bad glove, but he's got some speed to him. He's got 2, and then you've got the 1 talent guy. The guy that I used to think of the 1 talent guy was Dave Kingman. He only hit for power. If he hit the ball, it went out of the park. Otherwise, it was the strikeout. And he wasn't really a good fielder. He couldn't run fast. The only thing he could do was hit the ball far. And so you've got these 3 different categories of people, and you have those people, the 5 talent guy, the guy that's he's the center stage person. He's the one that draws all of the attention. He's got everything, and everybody else sits back and is in awe of the 5-skill guy. The 2-skill guy wishes that he's the 5-skill guy. The 1-skill guy wishes that he was the 2-skill guy. And we look at it and say, God's given you skills. And you need to use those skills, those talents, for the ministry of the church, for the work of God's kingdom. The problem with that doesn't take the context in order. It simply takes a term that we have used, talents, and takes it and uses it the way that we would normally use it. Actually, a talent had nothing to do with skill. A talent was a monetary figure. It was an amount of money equal to 15 years of wages for a common laborer. Okay? And so we would look at the 5-talent guy, he's got a lot. The 1-talent guy, God's not given him much. But if you take the definition of what a talent was, this 1-talent guy in today's economy would have $400,000 to $500,000 to deal with. Okay? In this story, there are no small investments. God's not doling out and gives a lot to some and just a minimum amount to someone else. Even those who have received the 1 talent have received a tremendous amount. We need to understand that. That 1 talent person isn't somebody who's been shortchanged by God. That 1 talent person is somebody who still has received a bountiful blessing, a bountiful stewardship by God. It's not how we normally understand it. But now look at the context. Because largely what we've done is we've taken this story and we removed it from context, and as we remove it from context, we can come to the nice, it's all about using your gifts, using your skills, using your talents for the kingdom. But what happens is in the context, there's a flow in the context here. Beginning back in chapter 14, Jesus tells a string of 3 parables. And in that string of 3 parables, he ends with the third parable is the parable of the stewards, the parable of the talents. The first of those is a parable of the unwise and the wise servants. The master goes away, entrusts them, and comes back. The second parable he teaches of the parable of the 10 virgins, who the bridegroom is away and he comes ready for the bride feast, and then they go off to the wedding. This one, the king goes away and trusts his servants and comes back. Each of those parables is a parable expressing judgment upon the people of Israel. In the first parable, it's the parable where the wise servant is getting ready. He knows that the master is gone. He's doing the tasks that the master had set him upon. He's doing the stuff that had been charted out for him. He's fulfilling his responsibilities. And the foolish servant says, he's not coming back real soon. I got all day. I got all week to take care of it. I got all year. I can just sit back and party and have fun and get drunk and he's beating on the other slaves, the other servants, and taking abuse of them, and says, I've got all time in the world to make up for this and to get everything back in its right footing before he gets back. And he gets surprised when the master comes back and surprises him while he's in his drunken stupor and pronounces judgment. He's cast into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, remember, a couple of weeks ago, I talked to you about parenthetical statements where Jesus says something, there's something that happens, and then he ends up with the same statement, and it says those things are all interlocked together. That parable ends with the same thing that the parable of the talents ends with. That servant is thrown out into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Second parable happens with the 10 virgins. They're waiting for the bride feast to happen, they're waiting for the groom to arrive and then take the bridegroom or take the bride to the wedding feast. 5 of them, they get ready. They have their oil purchased. They have their lamps trimmed, ready to light. The other ones say, who knows when he's coming? He just may be standing her up, for all we know. He may not show up at all. So why worry about it? Why get ready? We're just going to stay here. We're going to have fun together. We're going to have another bridal shower kind of thing. You know, we're just going to enjoy ourselves. And the bridegroom shows up, and they don't have the oil necessary. They haven't trimmed their lamps. They ask the other young ladies, can you share your oil with us? No, we can't share our oil with you, because if we share our oil with you, we won't have enough ourselves. And then the story. You see, the issue here isn't just a nice story about using our talents, using our skills. The issue here is Jesus saying there is condemnation on those who don't get themselves ready. There's condemnation on those who claim to be mine, but don't take the risk. You see, as we look at this text, what we have there is in the accounting, we've got the steward going off, and he's going off. He makes his plans. He says, here's the things. I'm giving you 5, you 2, you 1. All of them are big gifts, big stewards. All of you are being entrusted with a lot. None of you are being shortchanged. And he leaves. While he's gone, 2 of them double what they have been given. The last one takes and puts it in his mattress. Now, I've not understood why people would continue to put money in their mattress when people know that that's where you hide money. That it's not very safe there, but he takes it and he buries it in a hole. That was a common practice. You take your money, if there's not a bank nearby, something that you trust, you take it and you bury it on your property. Jesus told another story about that. He said the kingdom of heaven is like a man who's out digging in a field, and he unburies his treasure. And he went and sells everything that he gets to buy this property of land so that he can get that treasure. It was a common practice. But it's dumb. It doesn't utilize the strength that money brings with it to reduplicate itself. He just takes and hides it. And then the time for the accounting happens. The first 2 guys are brought forward. They say, here's what you gave to us. We doubled it, and here's the whole thing. This guy says, and so those first 2 guys are blessed. Enter into your Father's happiness, your joy. Experience the joy that I have because you have been faithful. The 3rd guy comes up. Here's your 1 bag, your 1 talent. I understand you're a hard man, and I didn't want to take the risk that I would lose your money, so I buried it. Here it all is. And the owner's response, wicked slave, you lazy bum. You didn't even take the effort to take it to the bank so I could get the interest off of it. You simply wasted your opportunity. And then notice the words of condemnation again. Into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The king here, this person, he doesn't take it lightly that the person that he had entrusted doesn't do anything beneficial for him, for his kingdom. He takes it very seriously. The terms that Jesus uses there are terms of a heaven and hell experience. That those who were faithful are rewarded with an eternity of joy in the Master's presence. Those who are unfaithful are cast into a place of punishment. You see, where it's not just the feel-good, use your gifts story. It goes much deeper. It should rattle us much more. Here's what we learn from that story. First thing we learn is that the rewarded recognize God. The rewarded recognize God. For the rewarded both come when they come to present their their accounting. The first thing they say is, "You gave us. You gave us 5, or you gave us 2." They recognize that God is a God of blessing, and that God has poured blessing into their lives. Notice that the place they begin their accounting is God. God has given me. God has blessed me. God has poured into me. God has overwhelmingly overflowed His abundance into my life. I don't have any reason to say God's been unfair. God has been unjust. God has neglected me, because God gave to me. You know, from your very first breath, God gave. God began pouring into your life and has continued to pour into your life, and the recollection that we must have is that God continues to give. The rewarded recognize it all starts with God. Israel had forgotten that. Israel had forgotten that it began with God, and they began to think it all was about them. They thought they were the special ones. Not that God had made them special because of His blessing upon them. They thought their specialness had to do with who they were. And they forgot it begins with God. In contrast with the rewarded begin with God, notice what the wicked servant does. The reckoned blame God. You see, it wasn't that he got only 1 talent and God considered him an inferior servant. Because remember, that 1 talent was a tremendous amount. But he says, I know that you are a taskmaster. I know that you harvest where you don't sow. I know that you're tough on people. You expect a lot. And because you expect so much and judge so highly, I took the easy road. It's your fault. If you weren't such a tough slave driver, if you didn't expect so much, if you didn't have so high standards, if you didn't want me to be so good, to live so holy, to live a life that demands something from me, if you would just drop your standards a little bit, if you would just let things be and let me live the life that I have, if you would just stop being so holy, then maybe my life would be a lot easier and I'd be able to perform for you. But I don't want to fail, so I'm not even going to try. It's your fault. Recognize that blame game goes all the way back to the garden. Remember, as God's going through asking them about their sin, their choice to sin, he asked the woman, he asked, "Why'd you do it?" And the man's response is, "The woman you gave me did it. She did it. She ate it, and she gave it to me. It's your fault." The woman's response was, "It's the serpent. It's his fault." Neither one of them were to blame. Somebody else is all. And so sometimes that's our spiritual problem, is that we don't take responsibility. We don't accept that we are to blame in the places where we have willingly failed to live up to the standards that God calls us to. We want to blame somebody else. It's our spouse's fault, or it's our employer's fault, or it's our coworker's fault, or it's our parents' fault, or it's our great-grandparents' fault, because that sin follows you for the third or fourth generation. So I'm pointing way back there and say it's their fault. Ultimately, we say it's God's fault. God, you expect too much from me. The reckoning is for those that say, God, I want to be considered your follower. I want to be considered your servant, but I'm not willing to put out enough effort. I'm going to blame you. Second thing that we learn from this text is the rewarded take risks. The rewarded take risks. It would take a risk for him to reduplicate his $2 million. It would have taken risk for the second one to double his $1 million. Things don't just double automatically. And so there would have been risks, and so they would have stepped out in some ways that would have put their master's property in jeopardy, but saying, these are wise decisions that we've got to make in order to be fair and just stewards, to do the responsibility that he's left us. He didn't leave us here to just sit on the money. He wants us to do something with it. God didn't sit us here to just sit on the blessings that he has given us. What are those blessings that he's given us? I mean, Israel, really, the issue that he had, they can look back and they say, okay, they gave us the law, he gave us the temple, he gave us this, but really the big issue was he made us his people. And that's the big talent that God gives us. The value of that talent is beyond measure. That God has said, you are my people. And the wise, those who are rewarded, are the ones who take that prize that God has given us through the death of his Son, who redeemed us from our sin, and say, I am going to take risks because God has given me this blessing. I'm going to start living differently. And so what if somebody starts saying, what got into you? What makes you think you're so holy and righteous? I'm going to start sharing the message with people who show some receptivity. I'm not going to hide my light under a bushel. I'm going to let it shine. Now, does that mean I'm going to be nasty about it? That I'm going to share it in a way that makes people want to avoid me? No, because that's not an investment in the kingdom. That's a bad investment. But I'm going to live it in a way that begins to be infectious, begins to draw people in, begins to say, there's something I've got that you want. I'm going to begin to make choices that this world doesn't understand, because I want to develop the holiness that God has granted me the ability through the presence of the Holy Spirit in my life to attain, to achieve. I'm going to take risks. The reckoned avoid risk. You see it in the story? I'm not going to lose your money. I'm not going to lose what you gave to me, so I'm just going to bury it away, and I'll give it back to when the day comes. It's all yours. I want to make sure that I don't risk it and lose it. And his failure to risk it and lose it doesn't make sense in the accusation that he makes towards the guy earlier. If the guy is really so hard, is really such a dominant boss that would leave him in a place of judgment if he doesn't achieve, then why wouldn't he take risks knowing that if I don't achieve, I'm taking a risk? You see, some of us, I think, are risk averse when it comes to our faith. Some of us are unwilling to make the difficult choices. The choices that may have financial ramifications for us, but say, I'm making this choice because spiritually it's the best decision that I can make. Some of us fail to make the choices relationally because we don't want to give up on the money, on the investment that we have in the bad relationship, the bad blood, the resentment. We don't want to cash that in order to develop a relationship that's whole and healthy. We want to continue to live with what we've become comfortable with. You see, this really becomes an issue of ease and comfort. Sometimes we get too comfortable in the place that we are as believers, and it becomes too easy to live a life as a believer. But what we don't understand is in our comfort and in our ease, we really aren't living the life of a believer. We've only masked over what we think a believer really is. It becomes something for us to be concerned about. Sometimes the biggest mistake that you can make is being afraid to make one. And that's especially true when it comes to being those decisions in our spiritual lives. For many of us, the greatest danger is not that we renounce our faith. John Ortberg said it's that we become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we settle for a mediocre version of it. It's a real challenge for us. That we settle into that posture of that third servant that says, I'm not going to take the risk. I'm just going to live as things are. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it ride. But I'm not going to risk. The last thing that we learn from this is that the rewarded are blessed. Enter into your master's joy. Enter into your master's joy. Joy for Jesus really carries the idea of that eternal presence of God living within us. When Jesus uses that term, that's really what he's pointing towards. A joy that begins here. So he's not saying just, you'll get rewarded when you get to heaven. Sometimes we talk like that as believers. We talk, all of the reward is off in some distant future. You just gotta buck up and deal with it for now because you're not getting any until the end. But Jesus here is saying, no, that joy begins now. And that joy becomes fully packaged in all of its splendor in eternity. Start experiencing the joy now. But understand, you only get the joy if you've taken the risk. You ever been in a place where you've taken a risk and you've come away from that risk and it all worked out, and man, you are feeling good. You are feeling on top of the world because you stepped out there, you took the risk, you placed yourself on the line, and God has come through and said, I bless that, and you are exhilarated. That's what he's talking about here. Having that exhilaration as we live now in the present life, as we take the risk to live how God calls us to live, we take that risk and we package it up and we say, here it is, God, I'm stepping out, I'm doing as you want, I'm taking that risk. It doesn't matter what people around me think, it doesn't matter what they believe, I'm going to follow after you, and it may look weird and strange to the rest of the world, but I'm going to do something that I've never done before. And I'm going to do what you've asked me to. And as you step out in that way, God says, let the blessings fall. But when we don't, when we fail to take the risks, we lose out on blessing. Now I want you to notice very clearly what this text teaches, that this one servant of his who had been entrusted is thrown out. And the terminology that's present there again is hell terminology. This isn't that you're going to still get into heaven, but you're going to get your hand slapped. That's not that terminology. Thrown out into the outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth is hell-type stuff. Recognize that Jesus is saying that there are people who will think that they're my followers, that think that they have served me, but are going to end up in hell. Why? Because they didn't use the gifts, the blessings that I gave them to advance my kingdom, which shows they weren't mine in the first place. They didn't live for me. They didn't serve me. They didn't do my will. And because of that, they don't experience that joy that I have to offer. There's a text that for a long period of time just perplexed me. Because as I was reading it through, there was a word that just seemed out of place. In Revelation chapter 21, it says, and he said to me, it's done, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give the spring of water of life without payment. That's the blessing for those who risk. That's the reward. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. What a refined reward that is for those who embrace the risk of a risky faith. But then it says, but as for the cowardly. Now, think of that term in reflection with the others, the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable. As for murderers, the sexually immoral, the sorcerers, idolaters, all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. What bothered me with that was he begins this list of people who are going to be thrown into hell with the cowardly. I mean, he throws in murderers and idolaters and sexually immoral and all these things, but he begins the list with the cowardly. Now, in lists like this, the first thing that's mentioned in the list is the one of the most significant importance, which makes me step back even further and say, how is cowardly more important to somebody who's being thrown into hell than a murderer? I mean, we all know murderers are a heinous evil and well deserving of eternal punishment. What about child molesters? What about people like that? Shouldn't they be at the top of the list? But here in Revelation, it's the cowardly who get put at the top of the list, saying they are the ones who ought to be most concerned about ending up in a life of hell. You know what the cowardly were? Those who were part of the church. They attended church, but they also figured, we'll also attend the pagan temple. We'll also take part in the pagan festivities. We understand that our allegiance is to God, but we can also do the other as well. They're the ones that said, our God is God, but second in charge is our president or our Caesar or whoever, and so we're gonna give our allegiance to the political figures as well. And what would happen is they'd be called to take into a position where their faith came to conflict with the decisions of this world, and overwhelmingly their decisions were to say, I'm going to be like the world rather than like God. They were unwilling to take the spiritual risk that may end up in their execution. Today I hear a lot about Christians being persecuted. We don't know what that word means in historical terms. But we still find ourselves making that same difficult decision, where the things of this world, the attraction of this world, the political positions of this world, the social ramifications of this world, the sins that we confront in this world, we find ourselves ever so gently leaning the scales where we're unwilling to take the risk. God calls us to a risky faith. Yes, He desires that you use your spiritual gifts and abilities to serve the church, but He's much more concerned about you taking a risk and living a life that is for Him, that desires to fulfill His purpose, that desires to live for Him in the midst of a world that says it will cost you. For us to say, I'm willing to embrace the cost, because no cost is greater than the cost of living without risk in my faith. Let's pray together. God, we invite you to expose our souls right now. God, show us those places where we've taken it easy. We've made the comfortable decision. We've compromised. We failed to take the risk. God, expose those places within us so that we can check them, so that we can correct them, so that we can begin to live a life that is redeemed and wholly pure and says, God, I'm willing to take the risk. I'm willing to let the Holy Spirit dwell within me. I'm willing to let Him change me, to make me different. Because you've already paid the price. I'm not willing to shortchange you. In the name of Christ we pray. And the church said.